And welcome once again to Discover Marshalltown. Kyle Martin hosting. And we are actually out and about today, a remote location. We are in the office of Dr. Theron Schutte. He is our school superintendent, fairly new to the job. Welcome, first of all.
Thank you very much.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about how long you've been here? It hasn't been too terribly long.
Well, officially I started July 1st, but I've actually been here since probably early to mid-June as far as hiring administrators. We've had quite a few positions to fill this year.
Right, yeah, it's been a crazy year. Before we talk about you coming from other school districts and such, talk about a little bit about growing up here, because you are a native.
I am. Yeah, my family moved to Marshalltown, I think, in the mid-'60s. So basically my whole school life was at Marshalltown, having grown up through Rogers Elementary School, Miller Junior High School, and then Marshalltown High School, graduating in 1981. Largest class to go through the high school with about 518 graduates, I believe.
Wow. We were talking before we went on the air, and a little bit about your background and your dad. And your office has a lot of golf memorabilia, and we were talking a little bit about your dad, and we share this in common, that my dad also desperately wanted me to be a golfer. It didn't quite work out that way, obviously, but your dad did as well. Your dad was a pretty good golfer, and from a very young age, you were out at Elmwood Country Club carrying the sticks.
Yeah, as I think and reflect back on it, I think it was just a means for him to have daycare while he played golf, which was to put me into caddy school. Elmwood was the last remaining caddy school in the state of Iowa, as carts were starting to become more popular, and so many of my friends and I spent pretty much the whole summers out there carrying clubs for people, and it was a great experience that I would never, have changed.
Sure.
And naturally, you're working out there, you play a lot out there, and I've always had a love for the game, although I've never professed to be all that good at it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you graduated in '81. If memory serves me correctly, that's about the year Caddyshack came out.
Right.
So you probably saw a lot of parallels to your own life.
We enjoyed that movie very much. It wasn't quite as glorified as what the movie made it, but there was a lot of truth to that, and that was a common thing across the country. Common experience that a lot of kids had the pleasure to do. In addition to that, most of us had paper routes back then, so we delivered papers early in the morning or in the afternoon, depending on if it was a Register, the Times Republican, and we went door to door collecting the fees. There was no online payment or credit card payment or that sort of thing. So all of those things were great life experiences.
You talked a little bit about your graduating class, the class of '81, and being so large. We probably haven't seen a class quite that big in a while. That was probably pretty unique. Did we just have a population boom right around the year you were born? Or?
Well, I think the state of Iowa, that was at the height of student enrollment across the state.
Right.
So, as I've been to a few other districts, I found that the same held true in a lot of other districts, that it was some of the largest classes to come through there. But it was pretty normal back then to be in the 400 to 500 range. I think we were a bit of a blip with the 518 graduates, and there were probably legitimately 550 or so that were in our class. At our class reunions, it's still not uncommon to get 300 people coming back. This last one was a bit smaller, but it was, interestingly enough, as big a class as it was a really close class too. And so it's always fun about every 5 years when we pull together and share old stories.
Sure,
and stuff, so.
Sure. Growing up here and going to high school at MHS, you participated in sports, and we were talking a little bit about that off air as well before we started taping the program. Tell me about your athletic prowess.
Well, that's a loaded question. No, I did. I was a three-sport athlete in high school: football, track, and baseball. I was also in student council and wound up being class president for my class, so I was honored to have been voted in for that, and was sportsman's club president. We had a sportsman's club
Neat.
back then as well, which was kind of like a letterman's club, I
Right.
think. So, yeah, so, very proud to, represent the class in all those capacities. It was a good time, especially in boys athletics, to be in Marshalltown. We just, there truly was a belief that anytime we took the field that we would or could win, and there were a lot of, during that era, in a variety of different sports, a lot of championships, whether it was conference championships or state championships. So, and it didn't matter, if it was football, basketball, wrestling, baseball, track. There were just a lot of success stories, and I was blessed to be around at a time where there were some tremendous athletes, both in my class and on each side of it. So.
Yeah. So when you graduated in 1981 and you went off to college, and we'll talk about college right now, where did you go, and did you know that you wanted to pursue education?
Well, I wound up, after Marshalltown High School, going to Central College in Pella, Iowa. And to be honest, probably playing football was what kind of guided me there. I was small in stature, although I'd had, quite a bit of success in high school and kind of knew my limitations. And so Central was a great fit in that it was a Division III, so there weren't athletic scholarships with Division III, but so school came first, and that was foremost important to me. But secondly, I wanted to be in a program that at that period of time had the same growth mindset or win mindset that Marshalltown High School did. So Central had a long history of, and still does, it's I think the third highest winning football program in the country of all classes. They
Right.
haven't had a losing season since I think the 60s, and they were relatively fresh off of having won a national championship, which Don Knock was actually our football coach, part of that team. And so that was probably what led me to Central amongst the other small Iowa private schools. And then I originally thought maybe pre-law was what I wanted to do, because I've always loved history, loved political science. And by the time I got through my freshman year, I saw that that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. And so what I really enjoyed doing was working with youth, and so it became kind of a natural fit, since I had had experience as well in Marshalltown at helping coach, some things, and volunteer in classrooms and stuff like that, education was, I think, my passion. So this will be my 32nd year in education, having served as a teacher, a coach, assistant principal, and superintendent.
Wow. So did you get your degree then from Central, and your teaching certificate, or did you go somewhere else?
I had a major in World and American History with a secondary education degree, and then shortly after I started working as a teacher in Clinton, Iowa, I was encouraged to continue my education, so I decided to do that in administration, and that was at Western Illinois University in Macomb. Once I finished that degree, I thought I might as well continue on, so I worked on a specialist degree in administration as well. And it just so happened that very early in my career, an opportunity presented itself to go into administration, much earlier than I would have ever planned on, but it felt right because it was in the building that I was at, and I loved working with both the students and the staff there. So I only taught 7 years and coached 7 years prior to moving into administration.
Wow.
So I was probably 28, 29 at
Really?
that time. Mm-hmm.
That is young.
So so I received those 2 degrees in educational administration while I was out east in eastern Iowa, and then the job brought me to Boone, Iowa. Actually, 2 things: lead principalship, and there was a desire to get closer to Marshalltown because my folks were struggling with some health issues. So we landed in Boone, Iowa, and Boone's about 15 minutes outside of Ames, getting closer every day with the way Ames is growing to the west. So I decided, what the heck, I might as well continue my education at Iowa State, and that's where I attained a PhD in educational leadership and policy studies there.
Yeah. We noticed the doctor in front of your name now. You left, or I shouldn't say left, but you advanced through the ranks of teaching. When did you become a principal then?
I became an assistant principal in 1992, so I started in 85,
Okay.
Teaching and coaching, and then came to Boone in 1995 as the lead middle school principal there. I did that for 9.5 years, and then midway through the year transitioned into the superintendency there.
Wow. And as far as the superintendent role, you've gone to different school districts, not just Boone, but you were over in Bettendorf.
Right, correct. Yeah, so I was in Boone 14 total years, 4.5 of which were as superintendent, and then my children had both graduated from Boone High School, and having been a product of a larger school system and having started out my career in a larger school system, as much as we loved the city of Boone and the school district of Boone, I thought, well, I'll probably regret if I never try to see what it's like to sail a bigger ship. And so that's what took us out to Bettendorf, Iowa in 2009. And so we were out there for 7 years, and now we're back in Central Iowa.
Yeah. Now, we talked about this at the beginning of the interview. You obviously grew up here and went to high school here. So when you found out the superintendent job was open, was that something you jumped on? Did you hear about it by word of mouth? Did a search committee member search you out? How did you hear about the job? And obviously it was something you wanted.
Yeah, I think it was through word of mouth, actually. I mean, I've always, particularly through the early 2000s, I've been out of Marshalltown basically for 35 years. My folks lived here till they passed in the early 2000s. So I've always, I've had a lot of love and pride for the community, and have always, through my folks or in other, through the media, tried to stay connected with what's happening, in my hometown. And so through word of mouth in some way, shape, or form, I had heard that Dr. Wade had decided to take a job back in Kansas. And I knew Dr. Wade through having just met him at a variety of superintendent meetings, and had always wished him well, and told him take care of my hometown and that sort of thing. So when I heard that job was open, and I was at a place where of readiness to kind of look and see if I wanted to do anything different, the timing just worked out really well in that regard. And I've always, in the back of my mind from the day I left high school, thought how neat it would be to come back and give back, because I had such a wonderful experience growing up in this community, being educated in this community, and interestingly enough, if people kind of go back in time, the time frame for which I was finishing high school was really when the transitioning was starting in Marshalltown, in terms of some companies moving out, other companies coming in, the demographics starting to turn, and so a lot of people, a lot of former colleagues, friends, teachers were somewhat discouraging the idea of coming back. They were like, you don't want to come back. It's not as you remember it. It's not the same, and this and that. And to be honest, the timing of whenever jobs that I would be interested in doing came open, it wasn't convenient with where I was in career or my kid's life or whatever. So this just happened to be the stars all aligning. And having been in Iowa my whole career and being in different communities, what I've come to find is that maybe not to the degree that Marshalltown's experienced, but most of Iowa is experiencing similar transition. There's some pockets around the state, in suburbia where, it's still a fairly strong socioeconomic situation with their demographic profiles. But for most of Iowa, they're dealing with similar challenges as it relates to growing poverty, which is happening across the country as well. So I've always loved to work in those environments. And for us, it's all about, regardless of the circumstances that kids and families are faced with, our job is to help every single student be as successful as they absolutely can be. And so that's our quest, and my quest is to figure out the right combination of supports that we need to provide so every student that walks out of Marshalltown High School can experience a similar life and follow their passion, their goals, their dreams, just as I did.
Sure. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Dr. Theron Schutte, our school superintendent. We'll be back with more Discover Marshalltown right after this.
When I was a young girl, my dream was to be a softball player. I had a wicked fastball that shattered the other teams. But when they cut the funding for physical education, I didn't get the chance to play, and my dream struck out. I still get to throw heat for a living, but it's just a little different now. Ah!
Welcome back to Discover Marshalltown. Kyle Martin hosting. We're with Dr. Theron Schutte, our Marshalltown school superintendent, and he grew up here, and he is back here. He is our, fairly new superintendent, and we're going to talk a little bit. It was kind of funny before we went on the air. I wish we had taped what we discussed before we went on the air, because let's talk a little bit about some of the restaurants, because we were talking about some of the places that you used to eat, and I think it'd just be kind of fun to share with our listeners of some of the restaurants that were here that are no longer here, like King's was, and where I grew up we also had a King's, and you were talking about a cuisine, a delicacy of something fried that you loved.
Yeah, they had what was called a cheese Frenchie. And so the State Fair probably has them. I haven't been back to the State Fair for a long time, but it was just literally a deep fried hunk of cheese. And so completely filled with cheddar cheese on the inside and deep fat fried around it. So it was a delicacy. I'm sure the calorie count had to be astronomical.
Yeah, it was probably good for loading up on calories and stuff for a young athlete. What about there was a different made right? We always have had Taylor's made right, but there was another made right as well.
Right. I lived in the vicinity of 8th and Summit, so 13th Street was kind of our stomping ground, and there used to be a Smitty made right there, which was also easy walking distance from either Franklin Field, where the high school played their football games back then, or from Miller Junior High School, where I went. So it was pretty much a daily rite of passage that on the way home you would stop off at Smitty's for a bowl of hamburger or made right and a root beer float. And actually going to school, we would always stop by Bassino's Market, which had a tremendous candy counter, which I'm sure the school officials just loved when we came in. And Seaburg Pharmacy also on 13th Street had a tremendous candy section too. So those were some of our favorite stomping grounds. And then Zeno's was always on the top of everybody's list. For pizza places, every weekend night after games, people were in Zeno's till close to it closing probably, and Tasty Freeze, Ev's. It's refreshing that many of those places are still here yet today.
Yeah, I bet. We were to circle back now to education. You talked a little bit about diversity, and our community is not. unique to that situation. We have a pretty large Hispanic population. We have Burmese. We're very multicultural. Is that something that you have had to deal with in other school districts, or is it just unique or something that you have just experienced recently? Because I would guess that is somewhat of a challenge.
Yeah, and that is somewhat unique, other than to a handful of communities in Iowa. The poverty piece is pretty universal, although in different degrees in different communities. But the diversity in terms of race and second language is certainly a significant new experience for me in terms of the degree of it here. We've had English as a second language in every district that I've been in, but nothing to the magnitude that Marshalltown's faced with. So when you couple the challenge of poverty, which oftentimes is hand in hand with the second language issue, that it's a significant challenge, but not something that can't be overcome, certainly.
Right.
And again, with poverty, it's you have to break that cycle, because oftentimes it's not just in the immediate time that families are struggling with it. Usually it's kind of generational, and usually education is a key component to that, a lack of education. So it used to be, even when I was in school, when you were in school, and we didn't realize this at the time, but our economy could only accommodate about 30% of us going on to get a 4-year degree and working in a field related to that. 70% of my class literally could walk right out of high school and probably go work for Lennox, work for Fisher,
right,
work for meat packing, which was significantly different than it is today. And those were good paying jobs for which people could buy a home eventually, raise a family,
sure,
and that sort of thing. And things have changed such that really that's reversed itself. Now 70% of the job market requires some form of post-secondary education. So at the bare minimum, we need kids to be positioned well to go on, whether it's to the community college, a vocational school, the military, which is significantly different to qualify to get into these days as far as their requirements, or a 4-year school. The number of jobs that you can just walk out of high school and get and make a decent living on are few and far between compared to what they were.
Yeah.
So,
What do you think of the Roundhouse now? Because you shared some stories with me when you were quite young about going to the Roundhouse. Oh, I just dropped the... All right, we'll edit that part. Okay.
Make sure it's still
All right, is it still working? Hello? Okay. Sorry, Craig. Let's talk about the Roundhouse a little bit, Dr. Schutte. You shared with me growing up in this community during the heyday of some of the basketball squads, whether it be boys and then later girls, the Roundhouse was packed. And we've gone through some really neat renovations. The Renovate the Roundhouse was spearheaded probably a little bit, well, actually probably several years before you got here. Mm-hmm. What do you think of it now compared to the way that it used to be?
Well, it's always been kind of a pride and joy for the community to have such a unique structure. So I think, what I like most about the Roundhouse renovation is that it maintained the integrity of the original
Sure.
structure, but just really gave it a significant facelift, in almost all aspects. So I think they've done a beautiful job of renovating that while keeping the original integrity of the structure, and we're excited to start moving forward in a more deliberate way on phase 2 of that Roundhouse project, which primarily is an auxiliary gymnasium and a practice wrestling facility.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to find out that the wrestlers had to go to a different school to use the wrestling room. So I didn't realize that, but it's pretty sharp. I saw it, before the renovation. It was fairly early on in my radio career here. I got an opportunity to go there several times, and it's pretty sharp now. But you told me it was packed back in the day. Huh?
Yeah,
you had to sit in the aisle.
those bleachers seem to go up to the stars
Yeah.
almost, and I think it held around 3,000 people.
Sure.
And I can remember, especially as a young kid, when my dad would take me to the games, oftentimes we'd be sitting in the aisles. There would be no seats available, so you were breaking fire code by, sitting in the aisles for either a tournament game or something like that. And that was the norm. It didn't matter if it was a Tuesday night, a Friday night,
Right.
a Saturday night. That's what people did. And across the country and state, as I've seen, even teams that, are perennial state champions are not filling the bleachers like they used to anymore, because there's just so many things that are pulling at people's time. But, winning makes a difference in that regard. And so, hopefully we'll get on a path of pride once again, and giving reason for a lot of people to come out and watch those games.
For sure. Let's talk a little bit about your family, if you don't mind. Let's talk a little bit about your wife and your kids and your grandfather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my wife Connie, who actually attended nursing school here in Marshalltown,
Okay.
that's when we met. She's a Newton native and a 81 grad as well, but she's a nurse currently in the Quad Cities, but hopefully, we'll get her relocated here to Marshalltown once I find a house. I have two beautiful daughters, Marie, who's 32, and Maggie, who's 25. Marie's a mother of 3 boys back in the Quad Cities, and it's pretty much a full-time job to keep those 3 corralled and content. And then Maggie just started her first year as a physical therapist in West Des Moines.
Okay. So you are active. If there are any real estate people out there, probably Dr. Schutte's already talked to you, but he is currently seeking a home, and you are hoping to get this all resolved and be settled in the community and be a homeowner.
Yes, it's not unusual for this to be kind of a struggle within the transition, and I haven't moved a lot during my career, but I've moved enough to know that sometimes it takes some time. And my wife and I, having been through this before, she pretty much knows that Monday through Friday she's not going to see me a whole lot anyway. So, we still obviously connect on the weekends, whether it be in the Quad Cities or here in Marshalltown or Des Moines or Central Iowa. But finding a house has been a bit of a challenge, at least a house, that we would be happy with. So, but keeping the fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Everybody tells me it will happen. It's
It
just
will.
a matter of timing.
Yeah.
So, I've been real thankful that Emerson Fisher really stepped up and helped me out with some temporary living accommodations
Good.
in order to help through this transition.
Good deal.
So,
Good deal. Marshalltonians taking care of one of their own, no doubt. When you were in Bettendorf, I think you and I talked about this on my radio show. You did not have to deal with the media near as much as you do, because we pester you. We want you on the radio. we want you on television like today. You have had to deal with the media a little bit, but probably you're getting a little more exposure here, and you seem very, very comfortable with it. I mean, I have to commend you for that.
Well, I guess I have to go back to what you said earlier. I actually had a lot of experience with the media, but it was television versus radio.
Okay, sure.
There were 3 television stations right there in the Quad City area, the Iowa, Illinois Quad Cities, and they were great about covering school things, mostly good stories, but the radio was less of a presence there, or at least in the the idea of schools being really connected with it,
Right.
which was totally different than the 14 years I was in Boone, where radio was a big
Oh yeah,
player in communication.
KWVG over there. Yeah, they're all
so
over it.
so yeah, I mean I've had plenty of experience with the media, but it was more so TV stations than it was radio.
Well, see, there you go. He could take over this program. We're about out of time. I greatly appreciate having you on the show. It's been fun to find out a little bit about your background, and now I want one of those cheese things.
Cheese Frenchie.
Cheese Frenchie. I want one of those from King's. This has been Discover Marshalltown. Kyle Martin hosting again. Until next time, we'll see you.